So this morning, we're going to work both your left and your right brain. You saw all the beautiful pictures in Kevin's presentation, and this is going to be, well, I know that some of you may still be hungover from last night, but it'll only be 30 minutes, and it'll be hopefully all good. I'm going to spend the next half an hour talking about the answers to these 5 questions, and this will be as true as we can promise to really what the title of this entire section really was, which is what's going on with mobile commerce today. So I'm going to spend some time talking about the size of the m-commerce industry, what are shoppers doing on different devices, what's the story with mobile conversion, and is it a problem that we really need to be worried about, and what can we even do about it if in fact there are some quick fixes? What's the story with retail apps, and are apps in fact, kind of how critical are they to our business? And probably one of the most important is what's going on with investments and the amount of money and resources that companies are actually dedicating to the entire mobile commerce ecosystem. So where are these data sources coming from? We do a lot of primary research at Forrester, so the answers to those 5 questions are going to be coming from essentially these 4 places. We do a lot of our own proprietary forecasts and a number of customer surveys. Almost monthly, there are thousands of consumers that we survey about things like their technology adoption and their usage of phones and tablets. We collect a significant amount of data from BizRate Insights because we partner with them to do a lot of the post-transaction studies and get a lot of the information and the details on how consumers are interacting on those devices. We'd mentioned the State of Retailing Online, which has a lot of the great B2B data. And we also do occasionally thought leadership papers, and there's one in particular that Visa had commissioned us to do back in the fall. And that was a V.me initiative. V.me is sort of Visa's version of PayPal. And there's a lot of interesting mobile data that I hadn't seen before that I thought would be useful to share with you here today as well. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start with the first question, which is the size of m-commerce and really how big is it right now? And just to start with some definitions, I know you know this, but this is the phone, this is the tablet, and it's important to recognize the difference because they are distinct in the ways that consumers use them, and of course in the data that we see. But for the purpose of this presentation, both of these are going to be considered mobile, and wherever possible, I will kind of elaborate on if it is smartphone data or if it is tablet data. But anytime I'm referring to mobile, it usually is the sum of those 2. Now, just a little bit of further clarification. Phablets, which are those larger phones that typically will have that cellular connection, we'll put in the smartphone bucket, and collectively there are about 200 million smartphone subscribers in the US. And those mini tablets, the iPad minis and other small, like the Samsung Galaxy, I think the 7 inches, are going to also be in the tablet number, and there are about, at this point in time, 100 million tablet owners in the US. So how much are phones going to generate? 2014, our estimate is $26 billion for our phone commerce transactions, and that's about 30 different physical goods and media categories that we are measuring. The estimate goes up to, by 2018, about $46 billion. Now, one piece of the smartphone commerce pie that we don't include in that number, and the reason is because our e-commerce collective figure is those 30 physical categories. We have separate forecasts for travel and other sectors. But when we add on travel and other services, that will add in 2014 another $17 billion. So what do we mean by travel and other services? Typically, that's going to include any of your Airbnb on a mobile phone spend, or your Uber spend, or even any restaurant spend. Like, for instance, if you order a Domino's pizza and you get cash on delivery, or you're ordering on Chipotle's app and you go pick it up in a physical store. So that's what's in the light blue figure. When I look at the tablet figure, that's even bigger. So by 2014, we have 56 billion being transacted on the tablet. And collectively, e-commerce, and I'll share with you those numbers in a minute, but it's about, in 2014, estimated to be about 300 billion. So a significantly higher tablet than phone number. And the travel and other services number, of course, on the tablet is smaller than on the phone for obvious reasons. You're not necessarily ordering an Uber car on your tablet device, more likely to do that on the phone. So how does this compare to the overall retail pie? When I look at the sum of the dark blue on those previous slides, we end up with about $82 billion for 2014, which is about somewhere between a fourth and a third of the overall e-commerce pie. And the real majority, the vast majority of sales are still happening in the offline world, which is the gold figure here. And this, by the way, excludes grocery, which is adds another $1 trillion or so to the denominator. But the point being that, kind of even though we have by 2018, and why mobile is still so important to us by 2018, well over half of what's transacted in e-commerce is going to be on these mobile devices. The majority is still happening in the offline world. Now, as far as like how the devices break out, we know that just the high-level data on the left being the percent of web shoppers, that penetration of people who own smartphones is certainly going up. And a significant portion of them are iPhone owners. So that's, of course, why there, of course, is the focus on the iDevices. Now, the one little bit about the iPhone number, it probably goes down slightly once you exclude iPod Touches, which happen to be in that number, but I don't think it's such a big number that it, would significantly distort that. I think that the story is largely consistent. Now, the story with the tablets, however, is very different, because look at that enormous growth rate between 2011 and 2014, is that by 2014, now more than half of all our web shoppers have tablets, so that's huge. It's the way that phones were back in 2011, and the vast majority is, in fact, the iPad, or a significant majority is, in fact, the iPad, and you have the Kindle and the Samsung Galaxy being a significantly lower number 2 and number 3 in that portrait. And if you include the mini with the iPad, that makes it even bigger. So just a little bit of some background as to the size of e-commerce or the size of m-commerce and what we're looking at there. Now, how are consumers actually shopping on different devices? And before we even answer that, I think it's important to see where are people using these devices. So we have the phone and the tablet. We have the dark blue being the places in the home, the black being where people are when they're traveling, and the gray being different venues and locations. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this is that the store is actually one of the top places that people are actually using their phone. Now, that does not mean that they are using their phone in stores to shop. They are just physically, it's one of those venues where you have the phone and there's content and information that is being accessed at that place. Now, it's significantly lower for the tablet, naturally, but the phone piece is certainly a big point. Now, the other thing that is critical to keep in mind with respect to the tablet, and this is something that I think we typically often already have a bias toward understanding there. Usually, anytime you talk to somebody, the perception is that the tablet is really about a very similar behavior to the PC, and the way that consumers interact with that content is largely one and the same. And that's really what this data showcases, is that in some ways there are certainly people spending more time online as a result of owning the tablet, but that also means that you're spending that time on that device while it comes at the expense of not spending as much time on your PC, which is the data on the right-hand side. Now, here's the thing that I think that is really interesting, is that data now is actually very, very similar to the phone, too. So look at the increase in the percent of people that are actually spending less time on their PCs as a result of having those smartphones as well. And I think that this ends up being behavior that's reflective of what we already see in countries like Japan and Korea, where the phone is actually a primary computing device. And it's something that we haven't been as familiar with, because the notion is that the phone is, that smaller form factor, not as convenient, not as easy to interact with. But in fact, what this data is showing is that we have to move toward understanding and recognizing that consumers are using that phone for more of the day-to-day activities that you may see happening on larger screens. And that has significant implications for our conversion rates and the types of research that we put around actually making that behavior better on the phone. We certainly see more consumers purchasing on the phone overall. I thought this was really interesting data between 2011 and 2014. If we divide everybody that has a smartphone and shops online into 3 buckets, you're either a buyer, a browser, or a non-buyer altogether. The buyer figure has gone up significantly, and a lot of that buying is really, really increasing in certain sectors, like certainly the highest income of all demographics, the $150,000 plus households, but it's also happening amongst Gen Y and Gen X. Now, if we look at the tablet number, that's also where we're seeing huge, huge lifts. Now nearly 2/3 of consumers who purchase online and also have tablets are buying on their tablet. The tablet consumer, the tablet buyer, I should say, skews a little bit older. It's very Gen X heavy, and not surprisingly, also very high income. But there's also a huge spike in kind of moderate income, in that kind of like upper middle class, 75 to 100K incomes as well. And that's where, there's a lot of the interesting substitute between the type of guest who is opting to really, purchase and complete a lot of transactions on those tablets versus the PC. When we look at those top shopping activities on phones versus tablets, one of the key highlights that I see about the phone is really twofold. On the one hand, you see a significant amount of those activities that are simply that substitute computing. It's really using that smartphone for those typical computing activities, but it's also about cross-channel and really supporting the sales activities that happen in physical stores. The 5th most common activity that consumers do on phones in a retail context is, in fact, downloading or redeeming coupons, which are always about that physical experience. Whereas for the tablet, it's much more about that browse experience or basically integrating research that happens to support some type of typical online activity that ultimately is about completing a transaction on a website. When we're looking at what else are consumers doing on these devices and how are they accessing content, they're often using search, and that applies across the board. I think that that's an important point to keep in mind, because that has implications for how much we continue to invest in apps and what is the importance of those apps. And then there is a significant percent of consumers that go directly to retail sites, and then you also have a significant portion accessing a lot of this content through email. And email is number 3 almost across the board for any type of device. This I thought was interesting data, because this is likely things that you're already seeing in kind of some of your key metrics, is the number of promotional emails that are actually opened across different devices. So that hierarchy typically of 1, 2, and 3 is desktop, PC, then it goes to smartphone, then it goes to tablet. And some of the things that I thought were really interesting and important to keep in mind: 48% of people who open their emails on these phones do so because of that reduction in friction, the ability to get straight to content without having to log in. And a significant portion of them have actually been inspired to buy, 67%, according to this particular data that we got from BizRate Insights, is that inspiration to purchase just after having opened that email on a mobile device itself. And that transitions to this next section, which is how much of a problem is really mobile conversion. And the reason we say that is that mobile conversion, and this is data that we typically see across the industry. I know that Monetate actually, with the EQ index, has a lot of this exact same data. But this is essentially also an aggregate of a bunch of retail sites. And what we see is that smartphone conversion rates, and conversion is defined by orders divided by the total number of sessions or visits to a particular site, that number is significantly lower, usually in the 20 to 25% of the desktop conversion, that hierarchy always being phone, tablet, and then desktop from a conversion rate standpoint. And there are a couple of reasons for it. One is that consumers naturally just find the phone less easy to purchase on. The dark blue is basically the percent of consumers who say that it is very easy to purchase on any of those devices. So it's not surprising at all to see that kind of the percent that find it easy is inversely correlated to that conversion rate. You also have an additional problem with the phone and converting on the phone, in that the average transaction value is significantly lower on that phone. And a significant portion of that is that consumers often will just add one unit to the cart and complete the transaction, or it will, a significant portion of those transactions happen on sites like Groupon or daily deal flash sale type sites where these are fast in and out transactions where there are not a lot of units added to a cart. And we also know that there is a significant amount of device switching that happens. And one of the prevailing hypotheses is that there's a significant amount of device switching that happens on mobile devices. And as you can see from this chart, or from the data points here, is that when we look at the multiple device situation, in the case of both tablets and phones, a significant portion of consumers will actually switch between devices. And in many cases, they'll go to other mobile devices. In some cases, they'll go to a PC to complete a transaction. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is that even in the case of the PC, there are a lot of people that switch devices. So I think that there are a couple of takeaways that come from this. One is that there are some elements of mobile conversion that are certainly affectable. And by that, what we mean are that certainly we can make payments easier, we can reduce the number of keystrokes, we can try to put the security badges to improve customer confidence levels in completing transactions. But the truth is that consumers are also pretty used to knowing where they want to complete the transaction. And at this point in time, it's not necessarily one of the most urgent issues to necessarily address, which is the fact that kind of in the short term, mobile conversion may not be as much of an issue as it will be in the long term when we do want to get that conversion rate probably from 0.6% to 1% or higher. We also know that a significant portion of shoppers actually prefer the PC. This is based on the percent of consumers. This was some of that Visa data that I had referred to earlier. When we asked consumers who had shopped and browsed without actually completing transactions on phones or tablets, why did they not complete a transaction on those devices? And the size of the screen was naturally one point. And then the third point I thought was also interesting is some concerns around securing financial information on that particular device. What are some of the issues that are related to apps? And one of the data points that I thought was really interesting is what types of apps are people actually using in a retail context? And the single biggest area of growth that we see across the board is the percent of consumers who, when they download an app that has some type of a retail focus, they're actually downloading retailer-specific apps. So that figure has gone from 33% of consumers to 45% in 2014. And retailer-specific apps are apps like the Amazon app or the Walgreens app or the Domino's Pizza app. The percent of consumers that have not downloaded a retail app is going down over time, and that growth is going toward those retailer-specific apps. Now, there are certain retailers that are getting a disproportionately large percent of those apps, but that number is going up across the board. It's also important to keep in mind that a significant portion of some of the challenges related to apps is related to app discovery. The single biggest way that virtually almost everyone finds out about apps is through some type of word of mouth marketing. So either they're learning about it from other people or they're learning about it through social media. A significantly important element are some of those retail websites advertising the app, or you see signage elsewhere. But the word of mouth component is at this point the prevailing way that consumers are learning about it. We did an open end and tried to get some insights from people as to kind of how are they actually finding out about it. And I thought that some of these really encapsulated some of those processes. It's a significant portion of people said that their spouses just installed the apps on their device, whether they knew it was there or not. A significant portion of them found out about it from younger people, from children, some asked teenagers. And I thought that the third one was very, very interesting too, which is this idea of consumers downloading an app at the moment that they need it. So if they are standing on the street and they need to order a taxi, to download the Uber app, or if they happen to be in a store at a moment in time and they want to, for instance, retrieve a coupon at a Target or a Walmart, to download the app at that moment in time. And I think that that's an interesting an important point to keep in mind with respect to even just promoting those apps at the moment that are necessary. Now that said, there are some challenges related to apps. And one of the biggest ones being that consumers actually don't explicitly say that they ever want to use apps. And in fact, a significant portion of consumers, when explicitly asked, how do you want to receive the content on any retailer who you're visiting or you're purchasing from, how do you want that content to be rendered to you on a mobile device? 37%, significantly higher than the next highest number here, actually just want to see the same standard site where they're pinching and squeezing the screen. And that, I think, is just a fascinating insight, because that's one of the reasons that we'll actually hear from retailers that when they sometimes optimize their site for mobile, sometimes those conversion rates actually go down, which is astounding, because you would think that that was the whole point of actually optimizing, is to kind of reduce some of that pinching and squeezing. And there are a number of other challenges. These apps, in many cases, can be cumbersome to download. They may take a lot of space on that hard drive, which can be an issue. They can be difficult, typo here, find, not fine. That even just getting that iPhone store to surface the app can be a challenge. There's the upgrades that can be very challenging, because you have to get the consumer to opt in to often receive that upgrade. They may not get repeat usage. And another challenge is privacy restrictions, specifically with respect to beacon technology, which, to even have the opportunity to do any type of beacon messaging requires an opt-in from the app, and that can be a significant challenge as well. But here is the big point that makes the investment in apps a really, really strong candidate nonetheless, even in spite of all of the challenges. And that is that when you take a random sample of consumers who have purchased online on a mobile device, in particular on a phone, there's a 40% chance that the last transaction that they've made is actually on an app. Now, those apps that do receive a lot of the benefit are a certain number of apps. Not everyone's app gets the same level of conversion. There are certain apps like Amazon or Groupon that happen to have those higher conversion rates. But the point here is that there is a disproportionately higher conversion rate on a retailer's app than on their mobile site, because a lot of those, the transactions that happen through that mobile website are dispersed across a far greater percent of retailers overall. And even with respect to the tablet, there's a significant portion of tablet transactions that happen on the app, though that disproportionate, the proportion that happens through the tablet app is less than the proportion that happens on the phone app, in large part because retailers are just even less likely to have a tablet app than a smartphone app. So finally, the investment level. And there's no question that a significant portion of retailers, most retailers, their top priority, where they're giving a significant amount of lip service to, is the mobile capabilities on their site. This was basically a list of what are retailers focused on. This is the shop.org State of Retailing Online data that we collect every year. And we asked companies, what's your top priority for the coming year? And almost across the board, mobile showed up as one of the top areas of investment. In some cases, it was about customizing content for the mobile devices. In some cases, it was really about responsive design and making the content as visible across different devices as it could be. Now, there are some significant challenges that retailers also have related to the expectations of consumers in the offline environment. There are a number of consumers that actually expect that store associates will use mobile devices in the physical store. So the consumer expectation is there that stores are mobilely enabled. So this idea of investing in mobile has to go much, much further than just simply making sure that the e-commerce content is renderable across mobile devices for the purposes of completing transactions. It's also about supporting the store experience. And there are also connectivity issues that stores need to be very cognizant of. This I thought was interesting because it was just high-level data on how consumers, and in this particular case, the base was of consumers who buy or purchase just in general, they're retail shoppers. How are they accessing their different internet connections on their devices, primarily their mobile devices? And the majority do it through the carrier networks. A number of them will do it through a password-protected Wi-Fi and connection, and then a minority, only 32%, actually do it on open Wi-Fi connections, and that's a big deal because there's not a lot of usage and uptake because there's friction. You have to change it in your settings, and you have to, often find it and, kind of go through that process. That's actually where a lot of retailers are investing. And it seems like there could be a little bit of a delta between how consumers want to access the content of a mobile device in a physical store versus where, as companies, are we allocating our focus. And even to get to that top, which is that carrier network connection, there's sometimes upgrades and infrastructure that are needed in that physical store to make sure that there aren't dead spots for those mobile devices as consumers are using them. So that adds another layer of complexity and how much the requirements are and how onerous they can be in actually creating superior mobile experiences for your shoppers. Now, that said, we also know that the amount of money that companies are spending on mobile is relatively small. And this is a survey that we did with, I think it was 145 e-business professionals. So these are companies that are managing the digital presence on their websites. And it's more than just retailers. It was anyone that has any type of a B2C or even a B2B type of kind of relationship with whoever their clients are. And while that number has gone up from 2012 to 2013, as you can see, the majority of companies are still spending less than $1 million on their entire mobile investment level. So this includes not just what they're spending on their apps, but on their phone interactions as well as on their tablet interactions. So we're still seeing that disconnect between what companies are actually wanting to do and how much they're spending in this particular channel. So just to summarize and kind of wrap up, because I know that there was a lot of data here and a lot of slides, we know that that the phones are used significantly more than tablets, but what I would argue is that phone sessions are arguably also less valuable. And I would actually make a case that maybe because those conversion rates for now are lower, that there may be a ratio of looking at those phone sessions, maybe at a ratio of 3 to 1 from a value standpoint, because a significant portion of them may go to places that aren't even intended to convert, like a store locator or to find directions or a phone number. We also know there's a significant amount of device switching that's already happening, and that's important to think about from the conversion rate standpoint. We know that there's a significant amount, the second bullet here is that there's offline shopping that's a significant outcome of phone browsing. So that is important because we know that the phone can support that offline transaction in the retail store versus the tablet, which is more for supporting kind of that online transaction. Non-buyers on mobile don't buy for two primary reasons, because of that small screen, but also privacy concerns. Now that said, we think that the small screen and the privacy issue are both things that will change. The early days of e-commerce, even when you go back to the data from 1997 or 1998, the same exact data that we now see about mobile, we saw with the desktop, the security concerns, the concerns around the ease of transactions. So we certainly envision that a lot of that behavior will shift and transfer over time. We know that every venue is now a place where shoppers use both phones and tablets. Those were those circle charts where we saw outside the home to inside the home, wherever a consumer is, they are using those devices, and they're more likely to use those devices in all of those places as they continue to take those devices to all of those places. Tablets, even though the phone has the conversion issues, the tablet is still driving most of that m-commerce revenue. That was that delta between the $26 billion and the $56 billion I showed you on those first few slides. And we know that apps, even though they suffer from challenges around findability, they suffer from challenges around, kind of upgrades and actually making the most of them, they convert well, but you do need to find what is your mobile moment. What is that element of time where consumers are most likely to leverage your device in a mobile context when they're on the go, and what is that opportunity that you have to support them? The next is that the amount of time that consumers spend online has changed significantly, and even phones are now cannibalizing the PC. And finally, the entire mobile budget for most organizations continues to remain pretty modest, and a significant portion of the reason for that is that mobile uncertainty is still very much a concern. Now, I know there's a lot here, and it may be a little overwhelming, but I thought that one acronym would summarize that. Clever, right? So I know there was a lot of information here. If you do have any questions, or if you'd like to get a copy of this presentation and you didn't already get it from Monetate, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to share it with you. So that brings me to the end. I think that I'm just on time, and thank you very much for your attention.